A large oak tree on a warm summer day lifts about 100 gallons of water from the soil to its highest leaves. 100 gallons, straight up. No motor, no pump, no moving parts. That water travels through tubes inside the tree that are, by the time they reach the top, thinner than a human hair. And some of these trees are 300 feet tall, 370 feet. In the case of the tallest redwoods, that is taller than the Statue of Liberty. So I want you to hold that picture in your mind. 370 feet of water hanging in microscopic tubes, rising against gravity, inside a living thing that has no muscles, no heart, no engine. Nothing that any engineer would recognize as a pump. And it does this all day, every day, all summer long, without stopping, without maintenance, without complaint. And I want to tell you something that will bother you. We do not fully understand how this works. We have a very good story. A compelling story, a story that most biologists accept. But when you push on that story, when you really lean on it with the weight of physics, some parts of it start to creak. That is what I want to investigate with you today. But not just the standard answer you get in a biology textbook. I want to chase this thing down, because the moment you start asking careful questions about how a tree moves water, you find yourself staring at one of the most beautiful unsolved puzzles in all of science. Let us start with what seems obvious. Surely the tree just sucks water up, right? Like a straw. You put a straw in a glass of water, you suck on the top and the water comes up. The tree evaporates water out of its leaves. That creates a kind of suction, and water gets pulled up from the roots. A straightforward mechanical process. Your first instinct is probably that this is a solved problem, that someone worked it out 200 years ago and everyone moved on. Except here's a fact that should stop you in your tracks. A suction pump, the best suction pump you can build, cannot lift water higher than about 34 feet. That is it. That is the absolute ceiling for suction. Why? Because suction is not really pulling. When you suck on a straw, you are not grabbing the water and hauling it up. What you are really doing is removing air pressure from the top. The atmosphere pushes down on the surface of the water in the glass, and with less pressure above, the water gets pushed up. But atmospheric pressure is only so strong. It can push a column of water up about 34 feet before the weight of the water column exactly matches the pressure of the atmosphere. After that, nothing. You could create a perfect vacuum at the top and the water will not rise 1 inch beyond 34 feet. So suction is out. It cannot be suction. Not for a 100-foot tree, and certainly not for a 300-foot redwood. Alright, so maybe it is capillary action. You have probably seen this. Dip a very thin glass tube into water and the water climbs up the inside of the tube all by itself. No suction needed. The water molecules are attracted to the glass. They grip the walls, and they pull themselves up. The thinner the tube, the higher the water climbs. And trees have very thin tubes inside them called xylem. So maybe capillary action does the job. Let us check the numbers. The xylem tubes in a tree trunk are roughly 20 to 200 micrometers across. That is thin, but not extraordinarily thin. If you calculate how high capillary action alone can lift water in a tube of that diameter, you get about 1 meter, 3 feet, maybe a little more, maybe a little less, depending on the exact size, but roughly 3 feet. 3 feet, the tree needs 300. Capillary action is off by a factor of 100. So that is two ideas that do not work. Suction fails at 34 feet. Capillary action fails at 3 feet. And the tree needs to move water 10 times beyond the suction limit and 100 times beyond the capillary limit. Something else is going on. Now there is a third thing people sometimes suggest: root pressure. The roots actively push water upward, and this is real. Roots do generate a small positive pressure. You can observe it directly. If you cut the top off certain plants, water will ooze out of the stump. The roots are pushing. But root pressure is weak. It can get water up maybe a few meters. In some plants on a cool morning, root pressure will push water out through the leaf edges as little droplets, a process called guttation. You may have seen these tiny drops on grass blades early in the morning and thought it was dew. It is not dew, it is water, the roots pushed all the way out. But root pressure cannot lift water to the top of a tall tree. Not even close. And here is the strange thing. Measurements show that in many tall trees, especially conifers, there is essentially no detectable root pressure at all. So whatever is lifting the water, the roots are barely helping. We have now eliminated the three most intuitive explanations Suction caps out at 34 feet. Capillary action gives you 3 feet. Root pressure adds a few meters at best, and the tree needs to get water 300 feet up against gravity through tubes thinner than a strand of spaghetti. So what is really happening? In 1894, two Irish plant scientists named Henry Dixon and John Joly proposed an idea. It was radical at the time, and in some ways it still is. They said the water is not pushed up from below, it is pulled up from above, not by suction, by something more direct. The water molecules themselves form a continuous chain from root to leaf, and when water evaporates from the leaf surface, it tugs on that chain. The tug travels down the entire length of the tree, all the way to the roots, pulling water upward the way you might pull a rope. This is called the cohesion-tension theory, and it has been the dominant explanation for over a century. Let me walk you through it, because the physics is gorgeous. But I am going to be more careful than your textbook. I want you to see where the theory is strong and where it starts to wobble. First, let me tell you about the pipes themselves, because they are extraordinary. The xylem tubes are not living cells. This is a crucial fact that most people miss. The cells that form the xylem die during development. Their contents dissolve, their end walls perforate or disappear, and what is left behind is a hollow tube made of dead cell wall material, lignified cellulose, mostly. It is basically wood, so the water transport system of a tree is made of dead tissue. There is no living membrane pumping water along, no cilia beating, no cellular machinery driving the flow. Just dead hollow pipes. In hardwood trees, these pipes are called vessels, and they can be quite wide, up to 500 micrometers in diameter and up to 10 meters long. They form when individual cells called vessel elements stack on top of each other and their shared walls dissolve, creating a continuous tube. In conifers, the system is different. Instead of wide vessels, conifers have tracheids. These are much smaller, rarely more than 30 micrometers wide and 5 millimeters long. And unlike vessels, tracheids do not have open ends. Water has to pass through tiny pits in the cell walls to move from one tracheid to the next. It is like drinking through a series of coffee stirrers with mesh screens between them instead of one wide garden hose. This distinction matters enormously, and I will come back to it. For now, just hold the picture. Dead pipes, no pump. Water goes up. Start at the top of the tree, in the leaves. Each leaf has thousands of tiny pores on its surface called stomata. When the sun is shining and photosynthesis is happening, these pores are open. Water inside the leaf evaporates through these pores into the air. This process is called transpiration. Now, the pores in the leaf are extraordinarily small. We are talking 2 to 5 nanometers across in the cell walls of the leaf tissue. At that scale, the surface tension of water is enormous relative to the volume. The water forms tiny curved surfaces, menisci, inside these pores, and the curvature generates a powerful inward pull, much more powerful than you would get in the larger xylem tubes of the trunk. So the initial tug, the thing that starts the chain reaction, happens at the leaf surface, in pores so small that the physics of surface tension really takes over. Let me give you a sense of the pressure difference we are talking about. The atmosphere around a leaf on a dry day has a water potential of roughly negative 100 megapascals. That is an insanely low number. The leaf itself might be at negative 1.5 megapascals. The stem at negative 0.6. The roots at negative 0.2. There is a smooth gradient of water potential from the soil, through the roots, up the stem, into the leaves, and out into the atmosphere. Water flows spontaneously from high potential to low potential, just as a ball rolls downhill. The atmosphere is the bottom of the hill, the soil is the top, and the tree is just the slope in between. Think about how counterintuitive that is. We think of the soil as being below the tree and the atmosphere as being above it. Spatially, the water goes up, but energetically it goes down. The water is rolling downhill the entire time, driven by the enormous dryness of the air. The sun provides the energy by heating the leaf and powering evaporation. Gravity is working against the flow, but the energy gradient from soil to atmosphere is so steep that gravity barely matters. It is like a river flowing uphill because someone tilted the whole landscape. That pull is transmitted downward through the water column, and this is where the magic of water comes in. Water molecules stick to each other. They form hydrogen bonds. Each water molecule has a slightly positive end and a slightly negative end, and these oppositely charged ends attract neighboring water molecules. The result is that water is remarkably cohesive. It holds together. In a thin tube, a column of water behaves almost like a solid rod. Pull on the top, and the whole column moves. Think of it this way. Imagine a chain made of water molecules, stretching from the roots to the leaves. When water evaporates at the top, it is like someone tugging on the top of the chain. The tug travels down, molecule by molecule, all the way to the roots. At the bottom, the pull draws more water out of the soil and into the root. And the key word is continuous. The chain must not break. From root tip to leaf surface, the water column must be one uninterrupted thread. If it breaks anywhere, the system above the break loses its connection to the water supply below. A gap of even a single millimeter is fatal to that particular pathway. Now here is something that should make your eyebrows go up. Water molecules do not stick together permanently. Each hydrogen bond between two water molecules lasts only about a trillionth of a second. Then it breaks. But almost immediately, each molecule forms a new hydrogen bond with a different neighbor. The bonds are constantly breaking and reforming, billions of times per second. It is not a static rope, it is more like a crowd of people holding hands. At any given instant, almost everyone is holding someone's hand. But the specific hand you are holding changes constantly. Despite the constant shuffling, the crowd moves together. Pull on one end, and the whole crowd moves in that direction. It is an elegant picture, and there is good experimental evidence for it. In the late 1800s, a German botanist cut down a 70-foot oak tree and placed the base of the trunk into a barrel of picric acid solution. The acid was drawn up through the trunk, not pushed by roots because the acid killed the root tissue immediately. Something was pulling it from above. The transpiration from the remaining leaves was dragging the fluid upward through dead tissue. Here is another piece of evidence. If you measure the diameter of a tree trunk very carefully, you find that it shrinks slightly during the day and expands at night. During the day, transpiration is high. Water is being pulled hard, and the tension in the water column actually squeezes the xylem tubes inward, narrowing the trunk by a tiny amount. At night, when the stomata close and transpiration slows, the tension relaxes and the trunk expands back. The tree literally gets thinner during the day because water is being yanked upward so hard. You can measure this with sensitive instruments. A large tree might shrink by a millimeter or two in diameter between dawn and afternoon. Not much, but real, and it is exactly what the cohesion-tension theory predicts. There is something else worth noting. People sometimes ask, how did the water column get established in the first place? If you need a continuous chain of water from root to leaf and the chain cannot form if there are any gaps, how does it start? The answer is that the tree builds the chain as it grows. When a tree is a seedling, only a few inches tall, the water column is trivially short. Capillary action and root pressure can easily fill those tiny initial vessels. As the tree grows taller, new xylem cells are added at the tips. Each new cell is filled with water from the cell below it before the living cell contents die and the vessel opens up for transport. The water column is extended gradually, cell by cell, inch by inch, over years and decades. The tree never has to fill a 300-foot column from scratch. It grows into it. So far, so good. The cohesion-tension theory is beautiful, but there is a problem. For this to work, the water inside the tree must be under tension. Not pressure. Tension, negative pressure. The water is being pulled, not pushed. And that means the water is in a very unusual state. And under normal circumstances, if you pull on a liquid hard enough, it boils. Not because it is hot, because the pressure drops so low that the liquid cannot hold itself together. You have probably seen this in a syringe. Pull the plunger back far enough and bubbles appear in the water, even at room temperature. The water cavitates, it forms vapor bubbles. Now let me make sure you feel the strangeness of this. We are used to thinking of pressure as something that is always positive. You pump up a tire. The pressure inside is 2 atmospheres, 3 atmospheres. A deep-sea diver experiences hundreds of atmospheres pressing in. Pressure is how hard something pushes. But inside a tree, the water is under negative pressure. It is being stretched, pulled apart. The molecules are being forced away from each other, farther than they want to be. This is not a metaphor. This is a measurable physical state. You can confirm it with a device called a pressure bomb, which is exactly as dramatic as it sounds. You take a small twig from a tree, seal it into a chamber with the cut end sticking out, and slowly increase the gas pressure inside the chamber. At some point, water starts to ooze from the cut end. The pressure you had to apply to squeeze that water out tells you how much tension the water was under when the twig was alive on the tree. And the numbers come back negative. Strongly negative. In a tall tree, the tension in the water column at the top can be enormous. Let me walk through the arithmetic with you because the numbers matter. A column of water 1 meter tall exerts a pressure of about a 1/100th of an atmosphere at its base. So a 100-meter column, which is about 330 feet, exerts about 1 atmosphere of gravitational pressure. But the tree needs more than just supporting the water column. It also needs to overcome the friction of water flowing through incredibly narrow xylem tubes. Taking everything into account, a 100-meter tree needs a tension of roughly -15 atmospheres just to hold the water up and keep it moving. During peak flow on a hot afternoon, the total tension at the top can reach -20 or -25 atmospheres. And if the soil is dry, making it harder for the roots to extract water, add another 10 atmospheres of tension on top of that. -25 atmospheres. To put that in perspective, a tire on your car runs at about 2 atmospheres of positive pressure. Imagine the opposite of 12 or 13 tire pressures, but pulling outward instead of pushing inward. That is what the water at the top of a tall tree is experiencing. Water in this state is metastable. It should, by all rights, boil. The water boils at 100 degrees Celsius at normal atmospheric pressure. But boiling is really about pressure, not temperature. If you reduce the pressure enough, water will boil at room temperature. At -25 atmospheres, water at any temperature should instantly vaporize. If you somehow had a beaker of water at that tension on your lab bench, it would explode into vapor faster than you could blink. But inside the xylem of a tree, the water holds together. Why? Because there are no nucleation sites. Boiling, like freezing, needs a seed, a tiny bubble, a rough spot on the wall, a speck of dust, a dissolved gas molecule that comes out of solution. Something for the vapor to form around. Without that seed, the transition from liquid to vapor simply cannot begin. The xylem tubes are relatively smooth, the water fills them completely, and the initial conditions when the water column formed back when the tree was a tiny seedling were such that no air was introduced, so the water hangs in this impossible state, stretched like a rubber band that should have snapped but has not because nothing has nudged it yet. It is like balancing a pencil on its tip. In theory, a perfectly balanced pencil could stand upright forever. In practice, the tiniest vibration knocks it over. The water in a tree is that balanced pencil, except it is 300 feet tall, and it stays balanced for months at a time.